Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second of our new three-part webinar series, Beyond Our Walls, exploring the impact of the Princess Margaret that we are having around the world through our global cancer program. My name is Megan Stovall-McKnight, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation, and I am so pleased to be your host today. Thank you for joining us. In our last session, Dr. Danielle Roden and Dr. Meredith Giuliani joined us with special guests from the Princess Margaret Global Oncology Leadership Development Program and discussed how the Princess Margaret is advancing global cancer care. The global cancer burden is significant. It is expected to reach 29 million new cancer cases by the year 2040, a 62% increase from the estimated 18.1 million new cancer cases in 2018. And as we know, cancer knows no boundaries. At the Princess Margaret, we know we are uniquely positioned to help address the growing disparities in cancer treatment within our communities and internationally. And as a global cancer leader in cancer research and innovation, the Princess Margaret shares its expertise globally and is strengthened through collaborations with leaders in over 500 institutions across 107 countries on every continent except Antarctica. These partnerships support improving standards of care and foster new research discoveries. As a top 5 cancer research center in the world, the Princess Margaret is truly global in our work and our impact. In today's session, we will have the opportunity to hear from our featured speakers, Doctors Mathieu Lupien and Monika Krzyzanowska, to hear how our international partnerships are helping us accelerate scientific discovery. And in the second half of today's session, we will speak to a panel of international senior scientists and research collaborators from Canada, Germany, and Brazil. We strongly encourage your questions and feedback, and you can submit questions throughout the session using the Slido below. The link is found just below the screen. I'd now like to introduce our 2 featured panelists. Dr. Mathieu Lupien is a senior scientist and the chair of External Partnerships and Collaborations Committee for the Global Cancer Research Program at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center. Dr. Lupien is recognized for his contribution to the field of cancer epigenetics and for demonstrating the role of the non-coding genome in cancer development. Among other honors, Dr. Lupien is the 2-time recipient of the Investigator Award from OICR and the Tillin McCullough Discovery of the Year Award. Dr. Monika Krzyzanowska is a practicing medical oncologist and a health services researcher at Princess Margaret Cancer Center in Toronto. The overarching goal of her research program is to improve the quality of care received by cancer patients. In addition to her clinical and research work, she holds leadership positions related to quality of cancer care at local, provincial, and international levels. Welcome, Mathieu and Monika.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Megan.
We're so thrilled to have you join us to continue the conversation about our global cancer program. Now, I'd like to get our audience to get to know you a little bit more. So why don't we start with you, Monika? What inspired you to get into cancer research and care?
I've wanted to be a physician for a very long time, since I was a child. And there's stories in my family of me writing prescriptions as a 3-year-old to my grandparents, fake prescriptions, that is. But I obviously didn't know what kind of physician I would be. A personal experience with cancer and in my early 20s led me to a decision to choose oncology as an area of passion for my clinical work. And initially, I thought being a physician basically meant you do clinical care all the time. But when I got into medical school and started sort of exploring research, I realized that sort of my other passion, which has been science and asking questions and solving problems, I didn't have to give up by being a physician, and that you can in fact could be both a clinician and a researcher. And while in training, I did do some basic science lab research like Mathieu, but it wasn't. But then I sort of learned about public health and health policy, and really started to feel very passionate about the possibilities and the impact of health services research on patient care directly. And so that's what made me decide to actually focus on health services research and quality of care as my area of academic interest. And so these days I can see both patients and what I see in clinic can inform the type of research questions that we look at and the types of studies that we conduct and have impact very quickly on our patients. So that's a little bit about me.
That's wonderful. You wear many hats here at Princess Margaret, and we are grateful for that. Mathieu, why don't I pass that question over to you? What inspired you to get into cancer research and care?
Well, I could summarize it as being one of the child legacy from the Terry Fox era. I grew up with Terry Fox being present, like with the Marathon of Hope. And then subsequently, when I was walking into research space, there was always a picture of Terry Fox somewhere. And so he has definitely impacted my upbringing, and to the point where it felt natural to go into research, into cancer research specifically, to be able to make a difference and maintain the legacy that he established.
Brilliant, brilliant. Terry Fox has had a very lasting legacy for sure all across Canada and around the world. So in addition to all of these roles, Monika, you play, and Mathieu, you've also extended, Monika in research and as a practicing medical oncologist, and Mathieu, you run a very successful lab. What inspired you to take on additional roles in the global cancer program? So Mathieu, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So the goal is to have impact, and there's many different ways to have impact to improve cancer care overall. And so definitely I'm committed to research. I've devoted my life to research. I've focused specifically on fundamental research, which is essential to come up with the discoveries that will impact the care of tomorrow, right? So the fundamental research, in a way, you can see it really as the basis of what needs to be done for new treatment strategies to be identified, for new modalities to monitor patients' response to treatment. It has to come from fundamental research. So I've definitely been exhaustively committed to that space. And along the way, what one realizes is that you gain from collaborations. You gain from the perspective of others that have been trained in a different environment, that have been exposed to a different way of seeing the same problem. The more diverse a community can be, the better it is at really identifying what needs to be worked on and studied when we're talking about innovation, because we're all walking in the darkness right here, right? So we're all trying to figure out what will be the best way to tackle a problem with limited information. And so with that in mind, what I realized over time is that there was this opportunity to bridge that gap by reaching out to cancer centers from across the world in a position to be able to learn of the best practices from these different centers. And at the same time, what we've created in the last few years is an exchange program where it's not just meeting, but it's actually exchanging trainees, such that trainees from other centers can come here, and we can also have our own trainees go abroad. And this has actually turned out to be a great opportunity for, again, sharing best practices, but also training the next generation of scientists that are fully immersed in research labs that do fundamental research, such as mine, but that also get to be in contact with the clinical space, so as to be able to really relay the information back and forth, that we can be educated about the most important clinical needs, and vice versa, that the clinical space can be informed of the most important discoveries from fundamental research, so that they can be prepared to see those discoveries translate into a clinical setting as fast as possible.
Yeah, we often talk about how that bench to bedside opportunity we have here at the Princess Margaret with the Research Institute and our World Leading Cancer Center is a real differentiator, because the science and the care come together. And in the global program, we're actually extending that to bedside and labs all around the world, which is pretty incredible.
Exactly. The key, if I can just add a little thing, is really to ensure that there's that two-way conversation taking place, that fundamental scientists are fully aware of what the clinical needs are, such that they can try to maximize their efforts towards addressing those needs, and vice versa. Once we have a discovery, we don't want it to be left on the shelves. We want those discoveries to be influencing clinical trials, influencing new uptake of technology, and so on and so forth. And the Princess Margaret is definitely a great example to the world for that type of relationship to be established. And so we're hopeful that through our interactions, we can give some of that know-how to centers across the world.
Absolutely. Monika, maybe I'll ask you the same question. You talked about how your career is unfolded and you got excited about health services and health policy. What inspired you to extend that into the global health and international space?
Thanks, Megan. So interestingly enough, I've been interested in global health for a long time. And initially it was in the infectious diseases space, because cancer wasn't talked much about on the sort of global arena, or at least collaborations in the same way. But I think that we have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to share, similar to what Mathieu was saying, but more on the healthcare delivery space. And so as we've been building these collaborations over the last little while with some of the other cancer centers around the globe, we realized that we're struggling with the same types of healthcare delivery issues. And so in order to get those innovations that Mathieu is talking about, that he's working on in the lab, to the patient, to the bedside, we also have to have effective models of care delivery. And with our growing patient population, with our sort of some of the limitations around the healthcare system, how can we make sure that everybody who can get some of these amazing new discoveries, benefit from some of these amazing new discoveries, how do we actually get it to the patient? And so in the collaborations, we've been able to sometimes do studies at 2 different centers, which allows us to sort of get additional information, learn sort of the best practices from the other centers, or test some of their new innovation, and then at the same time expose them to some of the innovative models that we have been able to come up with. So I think we will actually have impact a lot faster by working together rather than in a sort of a kind of more linear fashion.
Yeah. I love how both yourself, Monika, and Mathieu, how every point you're making, you're always tying it back to the patient, whether it's the work you're doing in the lab, the policy work you're doing, the health systems work that you're doing. It all comes down to how is that affecting patients here at the Princess Margaret or in cancer centers around the world. That's fantastic and so important to be at the heart of everything we're doing. Mathieu, I'm going to ask the next question to you. In your role as chair of external partnerships and collaborations, how do you see the program growing? How are you facilitating new partnerships? And since we have some guests from DKFZ with us, joining us later today, maybe you can just talk a little bit about the significance of that partnership and why did we choose to work with DKFZ?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you point out, just to explain that relationship we currently have with DKFZ, maybe with a little bit more detail, this opportunity. So DKFZ is the German Cancer Center of Excellence in Germany. And so it's very similar to the Princess Margaret as being one of the key beacons of research within their respective countries. And they also have relationships with hospitals, so do we. But they do things differently, right? They are a completely independent research center. And so we had a unique opportunity to establish a partnership with DKFZ where projects would be identified as ideal joint tandem projects where at least one investigator from the Princess Margaret and one investigator from the DKFZ would work together. And there was also a requirement for that team to be inclusive of at least one clinician, such as to ensure that whatever we would be doing, again, going back to the conversation of between bench and bedside, to make sure that we would be addressing an important clinical need and that our discoveries would rapidly be relayed back to the clinical team in order for an uptake of new discovery in a clinical setting. And so this was a very unique opportunity to be able to establish that relationship with the DKFZ, which we've had in place for just under 2 years right now. And it serves as a great pilot study to be able to assess what and how we should be operating to move forward with establishing similar relationships with other cancer centers around the world. You mentioned AC Camargo. It's definitely an institution with which we have good relationships. And so we're definitely looking forward to being able to establish similar types of partnerships with AC Camargo, where trainees transition from one cancer center to another, spend a year in the foreign lab, learning about how things are done in that foreign lab, and then come back home and bring back the best practices back home to be able to share and learn amongst all of these interactions.
Incredible. Could you tell us a little bit, Mathieu, about maybe 1 or 2 of the projects you're working on between Princess Margaret and DKFZ?
Right. So right now, the projects, there's of the projects that have been secured and funded. So there's one that specifically focuses on prostate cancer that we'll hear more about later, I guess, during this hour, which is specifically looking at understanding the nature of a prostate tumor at the single cell resolution to really be able to capture the full complex heterogeneity that lies within that tumor, and also start to identify the seeds of metastasis, the seeds of progression, as we're in a position to be able to look at what the nature of the primary tumor looks like, as well as what the tumor looks like in the flanking lymph nodes. And so we'll hear more about the details of these projects, I'm sure, a little bit later on, but that's a rough assessment. One of the second project is actually also looking at the impact of clonal hematopoiesis and how it can influence the likelihood of developing cancer over time. And so, again, I don't want to take I don't want to discuss these too much since we have the individuals working on these projects coming up. So I'll let them explain those in greater detail, but at least you know that there are leading edge projects looking at concepts that are definitely of high relevance to patients as much as to the fundamental discoveries we'll make out of it.
Perfect, perfect. I think you gave us the perfect amuse-bouche to just to whet our palate for the second half of the agenda today. Thank you. Monika, I'm going to take a question over to you around equity and quality of care. Can you talk about Princess Margaret's place in this role and our role in this globally?
Thanks, Megan. So, I mean, I think we're playing a very important role, or starting to play a very important role. As I think in your opening remarks, you mentioned, we're very well regarded and very well known for the quality of our education and the quality of our research. We're also known about the quality of our care. I think as one of the largest cancer centers around the globe, I think people are looking to us for innovations in care delivery and figuring out new ways of delivering oncology care. And so I think we are in a position to inform not just what gets done at Princess Margaret and how we look after patients and how we improve patient experience and outcomes, but also in other centers, both nationally and internationally. And at the same time, learn from these other centers and sort of adopt some of their innovations and sort of move the agenda forward. So I think and actually one of the projects that we're doing with AC Camargo, which is looking at the impact of the pandemic on quality of care for our patients, is going to help us to allow how the different policies and how the different models during the pandemic have impacted patients and the outcomes of our patients during this recently difficult time.
That's great, thank you. So I'm just going to ask you one additional question each, and then we're going to go to our next speaker. So we've had our global cancer program going obviously for several years. Maybe you could just speak to either prospectively, what new research opportunities do you see emerging as a result of all of these global partnerships, or maybe retrospectively, can you share with us maybe a breakthrough that's happened as a result of our global cancer program? So maybe Mathieu, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so for me, it's really an opportunity that we've been able to tap into to accelerate the uptake of new technologies and new ways of analyzing the data. So our partners, like going back to our partnership with the DKFZ, they have expertise in aspects where we're not necessarily as advanced as they are, and vice versa. We have expertise in aspects of research where they benefit from our collaboration. And so through these partnerships, it's really that we're accelerating the uptake of the latest technologies and of the latest know-how so as to be able to really make a difference. And so the current project that we have ongoing right now with, let's say, the prostate cancer project, I'll talk about that one in a little bit more detail. It gives us access to samples that were part of a large international effort to identify genetic drivers of cancer, of prostate cancer development. But now we're in a position to work with the DKFZ team to access those same samples that are extraordinarily precious, because you have up to 10 different biopsies from the same primary tumor and up to 6 metastases from the lymph nodes of that same patient. And that's an unbelievable task to gather such types of samples. And we're in a position to be working with them in a way that we can rapidly benefit from some of the technologies that we were amongst the first adopter of, which are single cell based chromatin variant identification assays. And so the samples arrived, we started processing them. Within a few months, we started having data that we could actually share with our group in the DKFZ. And so that now, because of these relationships, these samples are being analyzed in a way that would have taken maybe multiple months, if not a year more, to be analyzed if it wasn't this partnership. And similarly, now as we move forward, the data needs to be analyzed. And so instead of having only us looking at the data to analyze it, now there's a full team of us plus colleagues at the DKFZ and their partners from across Germany that will be able to take a look at that data and find the most critical piece of information to move our research projects into a meaningful discovery. And so we tap into a community. It's fabulous. Like from that standpoint, it's really accelerating our ability to generate data on important samples and at the same time analyze that data as effectively as possible in a team setting.
Amazing, amazing collaboration. Monika, how about you?
So, I mean, the themes are very similar, even though Mathieu and I really work at the two different ends of the spectrum, right? He in the lab and me. For me, the lab is really the clinic and the health system. It's really accelerating impact by collaborating together. With different organizations, we're able to test some of the solutions in different places or have efficiencies. So like the analysis kind of analogy that, if we're collecting data on evaluating some sort of an intervention, if we're analyzing it together, we have more brain power, we have less resources that we have to expand if we're doing one analysis. So there's really, frankly, I don't see any downside. It's all just very positive. And so I think the accelerating impact is really the biggest theme that I see, one of the biggest themes that I see out of the Global Cancer Program.
Brilliant, brilliant. All right, so I'm going to, Monika, Mathieu, I'm going to give you a moment to grab a sip of water while I just go to our next speaker. And before I introduce our panel of international collaborators, I'd love to welcome Tom Erlich. And Tom is, he is the president of Tanurb Developments as well as TRAM Developments in Toronto. He is an incredible dedicated champion for the Princess Margaret. Over the past 20 years, he has served on our board of directors of the foundation, including as chair, and has played critical roles in the development and implementation of many important programs, including Invest in Research, our Innovation Acceleration Fund, and most recently as co-chair for our Space Transformation Campaign at the Cancer Center. He is a strong advocate for clinical and basic research, as well as continually improving the patient experience of Princess Margaret. And he's also a member of the UHN Research Committee. So Tom, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start by asking you, what led you to become involved in the Global Cancer Program as a supporter?
Well, interesting enough, when I was chair, we started very preliminary discussions with AC Camargo, and I remember meeting with Chris Page and someone from the consulate just to start brainstorming about how we could collaborate and what that collaboration could look like. I look at things primarily from a fundraising perspective, and there was a real belief, and I still think there's a real belief that donors can have impact in two countries and in two institutions at the same time, and I think it's a real opportunity, especially for expats, for companies that are doing businesses in both countries, to support two amazing institutions and further the reach of Princess Margaret. And the other way is, well, I met Danielle Roden in another. I had the opportunity to meet Danielle in another situation, and once you listen to Danielle, you're all in. And between her and Meredith and obviously Mathieu and Monika, the passion that these researchers show for this program was inspiring. So that's how I started.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, cancer has no boundaries, and as Monika and Mathieu have said, their ability to partner and collaborate really allows us to accelerate work, not in just one country, but using the power of all of these leading thinkers from around the world. From your point of view, why is investing in the Princess Margaret and the Global Cancer Program so important?
Well, we know PMH is a top 5 cancer research center, and it's really important, as we've heard in both this session and last session, that we have as much global impact as possible, that we collaborate as much as possible, that we impart and we receive knowledge across the spectrum. I also think it's really a unique opportunity for donors who, again, want to have global impact and local impact to participate in this program. There are, as we know, there are various opportunities for funding specific research projects that are available at levels across the spectrum, frankly, for donors, and for donors to be able to have the opportunity to sit with, Mathieu or Monika and learn from others and see exactly where their dollars are going, I think is something that's very important and very interesting for donors. everybody wants to have impact, as we know. This is a way to see exactly what your impact, the impact of your dollars are, and having a global impact. And you know, what the most exciting thing for me is also we're training leaders of tomorrow. Like when you think about the amount of countries and the places we're doing business with, and the collaboration that's occurring with India, Israel, Germany, Jordan, and the trainees that are coming. I mean, it's very, very exciting to see how we can be supporting this research both internationally and locally. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us today, Tom. We're so fortunate to have a dedicated champion like you for Princess Margaret and the Global Cancer Program.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
So as Mathieu shared with you earlier, we are going to be looking today at two research collaborations that the Princess Margaret has established. The first with the German Cancer Research Center, DKFZ, and the second with AC Camargo in Brazil. So to introduce the DKFZ partnership, we have a special message from Dr. Michael Baumann, who's the chairman and scientific director of DKFZ.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Baumann. I'm the scientific director and chairman of the German Cancer Research Center, DKFZ, in Heidelberg. The DKFZ and the Princess Margaret Cancer Center in Toronto are among the leading cancer research centers worldwide. We have a joint mission to accelerate the discovery process, which eventually will lead to improved patient treatment and care. In 2017, we signed a memorandum of understanding, which committed us to work together to establish joint programs in research and in training on an international scale. We established a joint clinician and medical scientist fellowship program, which started in 2020. The program offers 2 years fellowships to clinician and medical scientists. It ensures protected time for translational cancer research, and it is jointly supervised by experienced scientists from both sides. A key element are research visits to up to 1 year to the respective partner center, and there's huge added value, an opportunity to perform excellent cancer research and to acquire highly valuable international experience. 3 talented young scientists are currently in the program. 1 scientist is working already in Toronto, and 2 scientists will come to Heidelberg. In September, we will have a virtual DKFZ Princess Margaret Jamboree to foster new partnerships between PIs of both centers to identify good tandems for future jointly supervised projects and to develop ideas for interesting programs for the future. So overall, the joint program offers excellent professional training and education opportunities for clinician and medical scientists in cancer research, and it is the basis for a world-class transatlantic platform for translational cancer research.
Welcome back. Joining us today to talk about their experience with the collaborators are Dr. Kira Kornienko and Dr. Clarissa Gerhauser from DKFZ in Germany. We also welcome Dr. Rob Vanner from the Princess Margaret, who is affiliated with our DKFZ Princess Margaret Partnership. And from AC Camargo in Sao Paulo, Brazil, please welcome Dr. Rachel Reichelman. Welcome, everyone.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Wonderful.
Hi.
All right, so I think I'm going to ask Monika and Mathieu to please introduce our collaborators. So Monika, maybe we'll start with you. If you could introduce your fellow collaborator, Dr. Rachel Reichelman.
Thanks, Megan. It's my great pleasure to formally introduce Dr. Rachel Reichelman. Dr. Reichelman is a medical oncologist at AC Camargo and the clinical head of oncology at AC Camargo, so a very big role. She's also an internationally renowned specialist in neuroendocrine tumors, which is also her area of academic research, amongst others. Dr. Reichelman and I, though, have known each other for somewhat longer. Dr. Reichelman was a clinical research fellow at Princess Margaret about 15 years ago, where she was one of our outstanding trainees, and obviously has gone on to do great things. And it's been wonderful through the Global Cancer Program to have the opportunity to collaborate with her again. So thanks, Rachel, and welcome.
Thank you. It is really an honor to be part of this webinar and to be here with you, Monika. I mean, I get emotional every time I remember our story and how everything started. I mean, being in a Princess Margaret really made a huge step in my career, and I'm a living proof of this international role that Princess Margaret has. Like being from Brazil and receiving all the knowledge that I got during the 2 years period during my fellowship was really extraordinary for my growth and my knowledge. And I'm really thankful for all Princess Margaret, but especially to Monika. Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, Mathieu, I'll pass it over to you. Could you please introduce your collaborators from DKFZ, Rob, Kira, and Clarissa?
Absolutely. So it's a pleasure to introduce first Clarissa Gerhauser, who's the principal investigator from the DKFZ that's overseeing the Joint Tandem project, where Kira Kornienko is the fellow who's back and forth between Toronto and Heidelberg, where the DKFZ is located. And so Kira is a fellow. She's been involved in the project for close to a year now, and we'll definitely get to hear of her experience. And Clarissa will give us some perspective on how it's been to interact with the Toronto group, as well as to oversee Kira's work over the last year from a distance. And then Rob Vanner, he's from the Princess Margaret Cancer Center. He's involved in this partnership with the DKFZ, with the group of Andreas Trump, specifically, as well as John Dick here in Toronto. And so we'll get the perspective from a Canadian colleague about to go to Germany to engage in this partnering opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. So I'm going to go around the room and ask you a similar question that I had asked Monika and Mathieu. Why were you interested in pursuing research that involved international collaboration? So Clarissa, why don't I start with you?
Well, I think international collaboration is a wonderful experience. As we already heard from Mathieu, it really broadens the spectrum of things we can do. I mean, I'm now in the prostate cancer field since a couple of years, and we had a very successful program locally. But now with this collaboration with Mathieu, it really helps us to dig into questions that, as he already mentioned, we could not answer by ourselves efficiently. So it really will make this project move forward quite rapidly. And I think Kira will really tell us about her lab experience, because I think what she learned in the last year is really amazing. Being a clinician who didn't have a lot of lab experience and now being put into the lab and even learning how to evaluate the data yourself is a wonderful experience. And for me, as like the remote supervisor, it was amazing to watch her really growing into the project. And I think Mathieu can really agree with me that we observed a great progress in this project through Kira and through our collaboration.
Well, Kira, I think we need to hand it over to you. Tell us about your experience that Clarissa was just speaking about.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having me, and I couldn't be any more grateful to be in this special place. I mean, I have applied more than 1.5 years ago for a clinician scientist fellowship, and as a clinician nearly ending my residency, you are diving into the patient care a lot, but you are not aware about the fundamental biology behind prostate cancer. And I can call myself so lucky that my last rotation in the clinics was the Uro-Oncology rotation. So I got a first view in the clinical studies. And so everything worked out perfectly to come to fundamental research and have these awesome supervisors above me who are assisting and supporting me so much, even in a phase of pandemic. And my prostate cancer project is I'm really thankful for having these samples and to get really support from all the lab members who assisted in a very difficult time. And the pandemic even made it better to get buried in work and like to accelerate my work progress of epigenetics. If I asked my colleagues, they couldn't even answer the question what epigenetics is. They have to Google it themselves because in the clinics, it's a little bit unfortunate, but the genetics with genetic markers are quite common, but like the epigenetic field is not yet involved. And so I'm in a very special position to give that sparkle of genetics and epigenetics back to the clinics. And yeah, so I'm really happy to be here and to share my experience with you.
Kira, first, some of our watchers today may not know the difference between genetics and epigenetics. Could you give us the quick Google answer for some of our watchers today?
Sure. Like in prostate cancer, for example, there are many markers, genetic markers. So the genes are, the DNA is made of different parts of genes, and these genes we can kind of point out, like with the blood test or like in the prostate samples, for example. And the epigenetics are all the mechanisms around it who help or like to assist the tumor growing or like to give the chance to establish a special environment to seed the metastasis. So it's a whole field around, and the genetics, some researchers might maybe not be very happy with this comment right now, but is the easier way to track cancer. And the epigenetics is way more complex to understand. And so that's why I maybe struggle a little bit myself to deliver this message for individuals who are not that familiar with that topic.
Oh, no, that was a great explanation, Kira. Mathieu, I see you laughing a little bit at some of the comments, just that genetics may be the easier way. Maybe you could just add some comments before we go over to Rob.
Well, I don't want to linger on to that issue, but I have to agree with Kira. I mean, the genetics is easy in the sense that, right, when we look at each other, we look different from each other, and we're always told that we have different traits because we have a different genetic or DNA sequence. My DNA sequence is not the same as yours. That's why I have brown hair as opposed to blonde hair and so on and so forth. But when it's time to look at a tumor, of course, one can look for mutations, and that's been the standard for decades. But a tumor itself is not a pathogen. Like, it's not a foreign body. It's not like a tissue transplant. A tumor is an organ that grows within you. And so the field of epigenetics is one that specifically looks at how organs develop in the course of normal development. Yeah. And so it is, by default, an ideal topic to look at to study cancer and cancer development, because it has to do with a tumor. But the problem there is that it's not that trivial to look at what are the epigenetic determinants of oncogenesis, because time-wise, the research community has not invested as much in that topic. So to Kira's point, right now, it's very straightforward. There's plenty of assays that one can uptake in the clinic that are relying on genetics. But we have, as scientists, a duty to come up with as many good assays for clinicians to agree to use in a clinical setting to really make an impact in care. And I think because we have the knowledge, we're highly committed in making that happen, because we know of the value. And as you pointed out earlier, cancer is everywhere, right? 1 in 2 will have cancer. And so cancer is personal. We want these assays to be in the clinic as soon as possible, because we're going to have to use them on us, our colleagues, our friends, and so on and so forth. So our drive to bring epigenetic assays into a clinical setting is very high, and it has high hopes of success. Let's phrase it that way. So thank you, Kira. I love your enthusiasm. We've succeeded in exposing you to this new field.
I think Mathieu, Kira will have to have a subsequent webinar on genetics versus epigenetics. That's great. Rob, I'm gonna invite you to comment next. You know, what inspired you to get involved in international collaboration? And I think you're just on the verge of your journey to DKFZ. So maybe you could talk us a little bit about that.
Sure thing. So first of all, I want to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here today, but then also very much grateful for the opportunity to be part of this international collaborative program, and for the funding that comes with that to support my work. So I'm a medical oncology trainee, and I'm on the path to become a clinician scientist, which would mean having a focused clinical practice where I'm taking care of patients with cancer, and then in parallel running a laboratory that studies the fundamental processes that go awry leading to the development of that cancer, and trying to understand how that happens, why treatments work or don't work, so that we can develop new treatments and ultimately lead to better outcomes for our patients. Now, as I come to the end of my training, I'm looking to do impactful research, not just now as essentially a postdoctoral fellow, but also do work that I can use to transition into establishing my own group and my own lab to try to have the greatest impact on cancer research and cancer care over the course of my career. And as people on this call likely know well, science is about sort of looking at the data that you have and trying to imagine how the world might be working, and then designing experiments to test that hypothesis to try to understand if you are in fact correct, and then changing your models as you go. Now, in order to come up with new ideas about how the world might be working, I think being exposed to a diversity of ideas, a diversity of experiences, a diversity of techniques is of the greatest importance. And so even though I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to train with excellent people in Toronto, I really jumped at the opportunity to travel abroad, to work with somebody like Andreas Trump, who's also, and to be at the DKFZ, recognized as one of the greatest cancer centers in Europe, to see how things are done there, to get exposure to the techniques that are in use, but also just to see how the research system works. How do clinicians in Germany interact with the researchers in Germany? And then also just to live abroad, I think having different exposures in your own life, I think in a sort of subconscious way also helps to be more creative as a scientist. And that's what I'm hoping, at least, when I travel overseas.
Amazing, thank you. I think that's a nice segue over to you, Rachel. You were on that journey, it sounds like 15 years ago, when you came to Princess Margaret to conduct part of your training here. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what inspired you to do it at that time, and why do you continue to be interested in pursuing research that involves international collaboration?
Thank you, Megan. I would say something similar, but actually very different from Monika. I always wanted to be a scientist, and then later on I decided to be a physician. So when I graduated from medical oncology, I worked for 1 year as a general oncologist, but also wanted to pursue a career in science. I wasn't sure at the time if it would be a clinical, the clinical point of view, or if it would be in the lab. But what happens is that we could develop a small project on drug interactions at that time. And during my last year of medical oncology fellowship, we applied for a ASCO grant that was devoted to people from developing countries. I got the award, and as part of it, we got a mentor. And at that time, my mentor was Professor Ian Tanurb. And then I was very fortunate. Ian offered me a position as a clinical fellow in clinical research in oncology at Princess Margaret. And then Monika became my full-time mentor there. So I spent 2 years in Toronto. This was in 2005 to 2007, so quite a long time ago. And it was one of the best things that happened to me. Not only, as Robert mentioned, like living abroad and having this experience internationally, and seeing different aspects and perspectives from people all over the globe, but also all the knowledge that I gained from methods in clinical research and etc. So I had the opportunity to publish and to learn. And then when I came back to Brazil, that was a quite difficult time, because it was not easy to pursue clinical research at the time. But fortunately, things I think went on the right way, and I finally got a position to work in clinical research that in the end led me to be with the position that I am now. I'm head of department. And then today I try to devote my time between clinical care management, husband, family, and also clinical research. I'm really passionate about it. When I went to Princess Margaret, I was really sure that this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, together with patient care. So I tried to devote, let's say, 20% of my time to clinical research. And then I think it was the beginning of, the mid last year or so, I was aware of this global grant for cancer research. And then Monika and I, we discussed how we could formally collaborate, like taking in these already ongoing partnership between AC Camargo and Princess Margaret, how we could formally collaborate on a project that actually had funds for it. And then Monika came up with this idea how we could evaluate the quality of cancer care in patients with colorectal and anal cancer. Well, several types of cancer, but the partnership was specifically for colorectal and anal cancer patients, how we could measure the quality of cancer care and outcomes prior and during the pandemics. And this is the project that we are doing now. We are in the phase of collecting the data. And what is really interesting is that I think we're all human beings, right? So although we have differences and regional differences in culture and sometimes in patterns of care, but in the end, we have the same, I'll say, same macro questions, same similar issues that we have to handle. And I think that doing these international collaborations, we learn from each other how we can, form solutions that can help each other. And I'm pretty sure that these solutions, when we publish it, the studies, we can help other people, we can help other countries to test these solutions and, maybe, really make impact on people everywhere.
Absolutely. I think you said there, Rachel, that we're all having similar questions and similar challenges, but it's actually the richness and the diversity of perspectives that allows us to accelerate the work that we're doing. Maybe Monika and Rachel, I'll ask you to jump in between the two of you. Can you speak to us about some of the different lessons or perspectives that you have learned through international collaboration that's really enriched your work?
Good question. So, I think the different types of perspectives is, usually things like refining the question that you're answering, also trying to figure out which questions make the most sense globally. So unlike fundamental research where, the basic science is sort of, I would think the same questions would be relevant. You would think that in trying to understand care delivery and health system organization, that different countries would struggle with different issues. That's actually not the case. As I've learned over the last decade plus, as I've been doing a lot longer health services research, where all of the different health systems are struggling with similar issues. So having international collaborations can help you to prioritize questions that are important. You want to create research that's generalizable. Also, there's been a lot more interest in sort of innovation in health system delivery. So for example, things like, and this is actually in parallel to what's going on in the society. So things like utilizing some of the innovations in digital technology for remote monitoring of patients, or moving more care into the home. So for example, at Princess Margaret, we're doing some work in sort of the hospital at home or Princess Margaret at home kind of idea. And also, but all the other systems are also trying to figure out similar questions. So in one of the, so as part of the partnership with AC Camargo, we've also started monthly webinars where we have presentations from Princess Margaret and from AC Camargo, and on a topic such as navigation. How do you help patients move through the system more effectively and in a better way? And it turns out that, while we've had some innovations at Princess Margaret in how we approach sort of innovation in navigation in sort of pockets. So for certain patient populations, we have very successful navigation programs. AC Camargo, for example, has done an excellent job with sort of an overarching navigation program where they actually navigate a lot of their patients, not just select populations. And so by having the exposure to that collaboration, we're now learning about ways of how we can do that more effectively. So getting ideas, figuring out which ideas to move forward, and then having different testing grounds for those ideas is some of the sort of few things that come to mind with that question.
That's great.
I don't know,
Thank
Rachel,
you.
if you have anything else to add. And I should mention trainees, and we've had, so both on our side and on Rachel's side, we have a number of trainees that have been helping us with this project. And we recently had a meeting, sort of a Zoom meeting with all of us, and just the excitement for them to be able to, at that stage of their career, to be involved in an international project. I think that was a very exciting part for them for their summer experience.
Clarissa, maybe I'm going to go back to you and talk about the collaborations between Princess Margaret and DKFZ. How has this advanced your research? And maybe you could speak a little bit about some of the different perspectives that have been brought to the table because of this international collaboration.
Well, yeah, again, it's a good question. So what we learned actually from this collaboration is that, on paper, it sounds easy to collaborate and to bring together experts. But in reality, I mean, just imagine we had samples from Germany, shipped them to Canada. They got analyzed and sequenced in Canada. Now the data, big amounts of data, because we analyzed every single cell of a piece of tumor, has to go back to Germany. And then we can work on that in Germany. So there are a lot of questions which now come up, which actually even involve our lawyers, because we have to make sure that the data is secured, that there's no leak, because it's patient data. So now we have to be extra careful. And I think when this collaboration was set up, maybe we didn't experience that, we didn't expect that we would be so successful in collaboration, so that we would generate in such a short time such a tremendous amount of data. So now to transfer the data back to Germany, to make it available to other people, so that we can start work on that now really is challenging us. And as I said, even our lawyers to set up the contracts to share the data, and so that everything is secured. I mean, we have to make sure of that. And so this is something that maybe, I don't know, Mathieu, maybe you can comment on that, but I think we didn't really foresee in the beginning, and this was now really a learning process for me. And when I'm now involved in another international collaboration, I think it's definitely something that I would bring up from the beginning.
You bring up important, Clarissa, and the only thing that I would add is the types of problem I'm always happy to have to deal with, because it's a sign that things are moving forward. So, and we know we're going to find a solution. So bring those on, no problem.
That's good. That's good. All right, I have one more question I'd just like to ask all of our panelists, all 6 of you, just in a minute each. What do you see as the future of research collaboration globally, and how do you think global cancer research will look in 10 years? So maybe, Rob, why don't I start with you?
So I think that it is going to increasingly become the norm for there to be these sorts of large-scale, multinational, very much collaborative projects, in part, at least in the basic sciences, because of the size and scale of projects that are being required in order to probe some of the most fundamental questions. And of course, that will require increase in research funding, and then also adapting to the challenges that were brought up about things like data sharing. It also will mean that I hope that it will become more common for trainees to travel between sites, because that's probably the best way to spark collaboration between PIs like Mathieu. So that's very much what I hope to see, that this becomes more common, hopefully with more programs like the one that I'm fortunate to be a part of.
That's great. Kira, do you have thoughts to add to the question?
Yeah, I would like to add that I really hope that this seed we set already with this collaboration is like growing over the next 10 years. And I think it's a steady work every day, like where we have to work on it to make it really growing, like care for it. And really like, I think everyone can see our enthusiasm about and our motivation in research. And I think like this will help making this really work and to progress really precision oncology for patients all around the world. I think this is really necessary, and I definitely will work on that goal to accomplish.
Rachel, what are your thoughts as you look 10 years out? What are your hopes and dreams for global cancer research?
I think it will only expand. I mean, it has been expanding since I came back. I think there's a lot of interest in pursuing, macro questions that can provide solutions globally. And I think more than that, I think more people, young scientists from developing countries or even poor countries are now seeing that they can be heard in terms of having opportunity to exchange knowledge and to learn, come back and really make a difference in their environment. So I think this is someone said this before, there's no downsides of global collaboration, I think, in any aspect, and science is not an exception.
Clarissa, you have some additional closing thoughts?
Well, yes. I have started epigenetic research about 10 years ago, and the development in technology and the speed in analyzing things and also the drop in costs has been tremendous. And now we are about to introduce an even new technology. And my dream would be, or it would be fantastic if now through multidisciplinary interactions, we could actually speed up these discoveries even more, that maybe in 10 years, we can analyze a patient while he is operated online directly, sequence and get his information and know immediately how we have to treat him afterwards. That would be, for me, a dream challenge to accomplish within the next 10 years.
Amazing. Mathieu, Monika, any closing thoughts from you guys? Mathieu, I'll start with you.
So yeah, I would bring just one aspect. So I think we've made a strong case for the need for collaborations and partnerships across the board outside of our own countries. But the reality is that the secure funding that supports such initiatives implies having government agreeing to put money on the table together. And that's extraordinarily challenging. And so all the initiatives that we're discussing here today have been enabled thanks to the donors that have given to the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation and allowed us to move forward with the foundation dollars to establish these partnerships with the DKFZ, for instance, AC Camargo in the past, and so on and so forth. And so I think the ideal is there. Whether we'll be in a position to convince our governments to work in partnerships so as to acknowledge these types of gains in discoveries when you do have these partnerships, that's a different story. But definitely on the short term, the donors are making a huge contribution and a huge impact in enabling these sorts of partnerships.
And how about you, Monika?
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. It's been such an amazing comments. I think, I don't see any downsides to collaboration. It's only positive things. It's just about how to make it happen. And as Mathieu and Clarissa had mentioned, but we're working through those challenges, and it will get easier as the collaborations grow. I think the other benefit of these types of collaborations is that we're not only collaborating across countries around specific areas of research, but we're also increasing collaboration between different areas of research within and between the countries. And what I mean about that, in order to realize the vision of Clarissa of the patient in being sequenced or their epigenetic profile being sorted out right at the time of diagnosis, they're going to need help from the health system scientists to help them get those innovations from the lab into the clinic. So I think that's the future. It's just figuring out how to actually make it happen effectively. And through all of that, it's really about accelerating the impact of all the research that's taking place.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I do want to thank all of our panelists for taking time out of your busy schedules from all around the world to be with us today. I also want to thank Tom Erlich, who joined us earlier and spoke just as Mathieu did about the pivotal role that donors are playing in enabling us to realize and develop partnerships and collaborations like those we shared with you today. So thank you to all of our viewers for joining our second installment of our Beyond the Walls series. In our third session, we will have the opportunity to learn about how the Princess Margaret has advanced international purpose-driven partnerships with our very special guest, Dr. Barry Gospodarowicz, past medical director of the Princess Margaret Cancer Center and current co-chair of the Global Cancer Program. In this session, Dr. Danielle Roden will moderate a panel featuring top cancer-centered leaders from Tata Memorial in India, King Hussein Cancer Center in Jordan, and AC Camargo in Brazil. You can register for the last session using the link below. So until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe and be well.